So sustainable development means we have been developing already and we need to make it sustainable. So since Industrial Revolution we have developed very rapidly and it has come with incredible amount of energy consumption, all of which is carbon based, and that's why we have a problem now in terms of climate change and greenhouse gas increases. Development has, in other words, so I have just taken a paragraph jumping around, picking the most salient points, so it's seems like a continuation of some other text, which it is. Development has, in other words, not all been fair since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Afghanistan is still on similar average levels of income and life expectancies as Sweden in 1840, Chad is as Sweden in 1860, Nigeria as Sweden in 1880, Namibia as Sweden in 1930, and Iran as Sweden in 1960. So you can also see the human complexity there in terms of Afghanistan being so far behind. But if you read about Afghanistan, it's always about Taliban and what they want to do with their country and their women and so on. Chad is not much in the news. Nigeria is known for various internet activities. Namibia, you don't hear much. Iran, of course, always battling all kinds of geopolitical wars directly or indirectly and so on. So human complexity is always part of that growth or development as well. In 1809, the average income per person in the richest country was 8 times that of the poorest country. In 2009, it was 2,207 times. So you can see the distance between the poorest and the richest has grown over time. However, these averages hide the real extent of economic inequality, as the wealth within a country is rarely distributed equally among the population. So in the US, when they keep talking about the top 1%, or you can do it for the world as well, in the US the richest are rich enough to own countries, and then you have poor people, and the latest numbers on fraction of people below poverty line in US is over 10%, which is rather sad for such a rich country. For instance, the richest 1% of the population of USA is now around 35% of all wealth, while the bottom 80% of the population own around 11%, and 15% of the American population live in poverty. This number, you have to be careful about how old it is and how it is defined as well. This represents 46.2 million people, which is more than the total population in all but 28 countries in the world. However, there are 40 countries that have even more unequal distribution of family income than USA, mainly Latin America with 18 countries and Africa with 13 countries, but also including Asian countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka and China. When looking at global inequality in individual wealth, the picture becomes even more shocking. Recent estimations point out that the richest 85 people in the world own the same wealth as the poorest half of the global population. So Oxfam keeps putting out these numbers, but this is from 2014, so you have to look up their latest report. That's 3.5 billion. Obviously this disparity and the numbers have grown. To put this in perspective, let's visualize what we let these groups of people stand in line with. Let's visualize that we let these groups of people stand in line with equal space between them. If the line of 85 people reaches over an American football field, the other line reaches 87 times around the world at the equator. I'll just give you the stark contrasts. Jumping to globalization, this is seen as an indication. The blue planet, which became popular after NASA started taking pictures from outside showing nice images of the Earth. We look as climate scientists at the dynamics about why there are these tilted structures and concentrated cloud bands and cyclonic, anticyclonic motions and so on. Nonetheless, it's supposed to give us a sense of how we are all together in this. So globalization, although some people have been moving around to distant places for millennia, exploring, trading, migrating or conquering, the vast majority stayed put without much of a notion of the wider world. Today, the situation is completely different. People generally still live locally, with a small but growing part of the global population having the means to travel far, but everywhere you go, people are increasingly and in various ways directly or indirectly connected to each other and the world. The process of change behind this transformation is called globalization, and there are few corners of our world that has not been affected by it. Okay, so that's the prop. But as we said, there are still hunter-gatherers like the Hadza in Africa and so on. In the Amazon there are tribes, in the Andaman Nicobar there are tribes which are untouched in many ways by the globalization. And there are lots of debates. The World Bank meetings followed by protests or accompanied by protests. People are arguing that globalization hasn't been good for all, which is obvious, but it is supposed to be good for all in the end by equalizing labor income, labor rates and so on and so forth. But as long as there are poor countries which can exploit their population numbers to keep labor costs low and sell things to rich countries, if India or US is importing a lot of things from China because they are cheap, then we are not worrying about the pay salaries of labor forces in China. We are just happy to buy cheap things. So this is not how globalization is supposed to work in theory, but nonetheless, globalization is characterized by 4 types of transformations. First of all, globalization involves an extension of political, economic and social activities across national and regional borders. There is the World Trade Organization, which tries to deal with trade policies. There is a World Bank, IMF, JEF and so on, which deal with economic development, climate change, social activities. UN deals with a lot of the social activities as well. Second, globalization is marked by the intensification of connections and flows of trade, finance, migration, etc. Thirdly, globalization is also marked by the increasing speed of global interactions and processes such as systems of transport, communication, which increase the velocity of the dissemination of people, goods and ideas. I'm always amazed when I get on a plane and land on the other at the other end of the world when I wake up, and it never ceases to amaze me. But then you also have COVID getting around really fast and so on, right? Finally, the increasing intensity and velocity of global interactions increase our interdependence in such a way that the effects of distant events can be highly significant elsewhere, and specific local developments can come to have considerable global consequences. In short, globalization is a process of change that is continuously extending, intensifying and speeding up our global interconnectedness in such a way that we are increasingly interdependent on each other. Is that a good thing? Some would argue that that's what has prevented the Third World War from breaking out, because everybody is worried about economic consequences of wars becoming too extensive in scale. So lots of wars go on. Syria has been going on, with lots of other countries directly or indirectly participating or supporting the war, extending them. Same with Ukraine and Russia, Hamas and Israel. So you always have wars going on as people, there is an old saying from the Mahabharata that says, war doesn't break out, there are always wars. Peace breaks out once in a while. So that's how it feels if you look at the wars that always go on. But with globalization, are we somehow reducing the possibility of very widespread global wars? Okay. Even if the modern state may still be a force to reckon with, globalization is increasing the importance of cities and regions, which is a prop here. Tokyo is city with the same GDP as Canada, which in turn is only surpassed by around 12 countries in the world. So you can see cities are hubs of financial activity, innovation, employment and art, culture, and so on. These cities and regions are not only places where the state, market, and civil society coexist, but also hubs in networks of flows of people, capital, goods, and services. Regardless if it is the hubs that run the networks or the new networks that generate the hubs, cities and regions depend on effective and efficient flows between as well as within them, constantly regardless of disturbances or disruption, now and in the future. So there is a certain attraction to cities. I love living in the cities. I've lived in New York, I've lived in Mumbai, back in Mumbai now, I've lived in DC and so on. If a city or region by any circumstance is disconnected, it initially causes problems for others in the network, but quite rapidly it is simply bypassed with staggering local consequences. Hence, it is not only vital to ensure that a city or a region stays connected to national and global networks, but also to maintain effective and efficient flows of people, capital, goods, and services within the city or region itself. These cities and regions comprise not only the public organizations often borrowing their names, but all other actors partaking in the overall functioning of society, representing the public and private spheres as well as civil society. So cities play a big role in climate change as well, and they have disproportionately high climate impacts as well. Densities of populations are high and exposure becomes high along with that, and so on. So maybe I should come back and do complexity in the increasing complexity in the next podcast, because this one is already 11.5 minutes long. Okay, see you in the next podcast.